The New York Mets are heading to Wrigley Field for a 3-game series. This matchup is a little extra personal for me. I'm going to talk about why. Well, welcome back to New York Sports WickerMedia. I'm Watts2K99. Thank you as always for taking the time to watch these videos. If you're brand new, welcome aboard. Please like and subscribe. If you're returning, welcome back. I really appreciate everybody's time and support. You know, there's certain rivalries in sports that just mean a little something extra to you. It might be Celtics-Lakers. It might be, Red Wings-Blackhawks. It could be all kinds of things. But there's something about Mets versus Cubs that means just a little something extra for me. Now, in this video, I'm actually going to tell you my history with Mets versus Cubs. I want to talk about the games I've been to and why this rivalry has meant a lot to me very personally over the years. So I grew up in New Jersey, central New Jersey in Edison. I went to Mets games growing up as a kid because my father refused to take the train to Yankee Stadium. That decision has cost me a lot of championships and brought on a lot of suffering for me. But about midway through high school in 1997, I moved out to Wheaton, Illinois in the suburbs of Chicago. And at the time, the Mets and the Cubs were in a bit of a wild card race. The Cubs and Giants would ultimately tie for the wild card spot. The Mets would lose out on that. And then I moved around a little bit, but essentially when you do the math, I spent 20 years living in Chicago between 1997 and 2017 when I moved out to the Norfolk area of Virginia. So I've been to a lot of baseball games. I've been to 21 ballparks, but there is no ballpark I've been to more than Wrigley Field. I've been there 24 times. By comparison, I've been to Citi Field 21 times, and I know that because I tracked it in the ballpark app on my cell phone on every game that I've ever been to. So what I'm going to do is actually take you through all Mets versus Cubs games that I've attended and just give you a little bit of idea of what I have watched, what I have gone through, and why I still get excited for these games. So the very first Mets versus Cubs game that I went to is, in my mind, maybe one of the most infamous games I've ever attended in my life. And I've been to over 100 baseball games. But the date was July 31st, 1999. Which also happened to be my 18th birthday. So my mother and ex-stepfather, that's all I'm going to say about him, they decided to take me to the game. We got seats on the third base line, pretty good seats, and I'm pretty excited. The Mets had a pretty darn good team at the time. That was the team that would go on all the way to the NLCS. It was pretty exciting. And I remember octaviodotel, one of the Mets' young stud prospects, was getting the start against the Cubs, who were not that good of a team at the time. They had Sammy Sosa, but not a lot else. And before my rear end even hit the seat, it was 7-0 Cubs in the first inning. Garygaetti, who I think was about 41 years old, hit a grand slam, and I just flipped my lid. I remember I had a soda in my hand. I literally slammed it on the ground. I think I destroyed this one woman's dress, but she should have been wearing white at the time. It was not my finest moment. The Mets did come back and make it 9-9 during the fifth inning, and then the Cubs went on to blitzkrieg them again. The final score was like Bears 17, Giants 10 is what it really came to. A couple of notes about that game that was pretty crazy. Rick Aguilera pitched in that game for the Cubs. He was still pitching in 1999, 13 years after he had been a starter for the Mets World Championship team. Dotel allowed 9 runs in 2 innings. Robinventura had a great game for the Mets. Went 4 for 5, 2 home runs, 6 RBIs, but the Cubs hit 4 home runs. It was just the wind was blowing out that day. It was ugly. And my 18th birthday, the Mets did a good job to wreck it. So I guess I was so traumatized by that game, I didn't go back for 4 years. My second game was September 16, 2003. This was, in my mind, maybe the best Cubs team that I have seen since I had moved there in 1997, and I'm including 2016 when I say that. The Mets, on the other hand, were a joke. That was the Steve Bartman year when they went all the way to the NLCS and the Marlins upset them, ultimately winning the World Series. And the Mets were terrible against the Cubs that year. They lost 5 out of 6. You know, Mark Prior, this was peak Mark Prior. He pitched 8 2/3 innings, came 1 out away from a complete game, 13 strikeouts. This was the Mets lineup. This is what I went and watched, 1 through 9. Roger Cedeno, Danny Garcia, Timo Perez. Yes, that Timo Perez. Timo Perez was batting 3rd for the Mets that game. Then you had Mike Piazza, then Jason Phillips, Ty Wigginton, Jorge Velandia, Jeff Duncan, and Jay So. It's no wonder Mark Prior had his ways with them. Oh, and some of the Mets subs included Tony Clark, Matt Watson, and Mike Glavine, who actually came up at a big pinch hitting spot. My goodness, yeah. 3-2, the Cubs, even though it was a 3-2 game, the outcome was never really in question. So 0-2. Then we go to May 10th, 2005. The Mets lose 7-0. Greg Maddux dominated. 7 innings, 10 strikeouts. Some of the Mets in that lineup were Josereyes, Carlosbeltran, clifffloyd, Mike Piazza. Didn't matter. Only met with multiple hits with Chris Woodward. He had 2 hits. Jeremy Burnitz was on that Cubs team. He had 2 hits, including a homer. So now I'm 0-3 in Wrigley Field. We skipped 2006, the year the Mets won the NL East, should have won the pennant, and possibly more. Didn't work out. Didn't attend. August 4th, 2007 was game number 4 that I went to. The Mets lose that game 6-2. And the crazy thing is the Mets went 5-2 against Chicago that year. I just happened to see one of the 2 losses. So Tedlilly was excellent in that game for the Cubs. John Maine was not as excellent for the Mets. Aaron Seeley actually came out of the bullpen and pitched 3 scoreless innings. It's amazing to me Aaron Seeley had a game that good, but he did. Moises Alou hit 2 solo home runs for the Mets. And this is a little crazy. So for the Cubs, clifffloyd was the 5-hitter for the Cubs that year. And at one point he comes out of the game, and who takes his place? Angelpagan, another past and future Met. So that was a little bit crazy. So that's another loss. I'm 0-4. On to 2008. I attended April 22nd. And did my luck change? No. Final score, Cubs 8, Mets 1. This was a 2-game series in Wrigley Field. They actually played 4 games that year in New York. By the way, those 2 games the Mets lost in Wrigley, they lost by a combined score of 15-2. It was Tedlilly again, 6 innings pitched, 1 hit allowed. Jorge Sosa got torched in the 9th inning for the Mets, or in the 8th inning, I should say. 2 innings pitched, 4 hits, 4 earned runs allowed. Kosuke Fukudome went 3 for 3. Ronnycedeno went 2 for 5 with 5 RBIs for the Cubs. Another game that was never really in doubt. On to game number 6. Let's go to 2009. It was August 28th. The Mets lose that game 5-2, and I'll give you one guess who was pitching for the Cubs that game. Tedlilly again. My God, the Mets made Tedlilly look like freaking Sandy Koufax in his prime. 7 1/3 innings, 2 runs allowed. The Mets starter that day, Pat Mish. Is there any Met fan out there who really remembers Pat Mish? Maybe a little glimpse. You might remember he was a lefty, actually stuck around for 2 years. Well, I got to say, Mish was not all that bad in this game. 7 innings pitched, 6 hits allowed, but only 1 run. Milton Bradley, who was just a sweetheart of a guy, and Alfonsosoriano had 3 hits apiece. Some of the people in this Mets lineup, my gosh. You had Jeff Francoeur hitting cleanup. You also had Omir Santos, Corey Sullivan, Wilson Valdez. My goodness, this is painful. So now it's a new decade. We go to 2010, and yeah, the Mets hadn't done too well in the games I'd watched, but maybe a new decade would bring new promise. No. The Mets lose on September 3rd, 2010, 7-6. Radickey was on the mound for the Mets that day. This was 2 years before his Cy Young season. Not so good. 6 innings pitched, 7 earned runs allowed. Angelpagan and Davidwright both went 3 for 5 for the Mets. But you know what? Maybe I would have learned a lesson after that game. Maybe I'm starting to realize that I'm like a bad luck charm. I'm bringing bad mojo. Maybe I should stay away for a while. No, I came back for more punishment the next day, September 4th, 2010. Another loss. Final score, Cubs 5, Mets 3. Carlos Zambrano pitches 7 innings. Henry Mejia allowed 4 runs in 5 innings. Carlos Beltran had 3 hits. Oh, and of course I missed the September 5th game, which the Mets won 18-5. For some reason, I sat that one out. So at this point, I'm 0-8 in Wrigley Field. Just unbelievable. On to 2011. It's another loss. This time it's a 11-1 Cubs final. 5 days earlier, here's the thing. 5 days before that, I was at Citi Field and saw the Mets beat the Nationals 1-0. Figured maybe I had some good mojo going. No. John Neese allows 5 runs in the first inning. Pat Mish, there's that name again, gives up another 3 runs in the 7th inning. Ryan Dempster pitches 7 innings for the Cubs. And so then comes May 25th. I missed that game, which was a 7-4 Mets victory, shortened by rain. But I came back on May 26th. Radickey's on the mound again. And the Mets lose again, this time 9-3. Dickey got hurt in that game fielding a ground ball. He had to leave in the 3rd inning. Between Pedro Beato and, again, Pat Mish, they gave up 7 runs between them. Oh, my gosh. It is just one loss after another. And I'll tell you what, it was a bad sign when you got Josereyes and Carlos Beltran batting 1st and 3rd, and the number 2 hitter in between them is Josh Thole. The only thing Josh Thole ever did well was catch R.A. Dickey. And then when you have Jason Bay in a Mets lineup, wearing a Mets jersey, enough said. It's not going to be very good. On to 2012 we go, June 25th. At this point, I'm 0-10. It would become 11 losses as they lose 6-1. But this time we had Johan Santana on the mound. 6 innings, 5 hits allowed, 2 runs, 6 strikeouts. But traviswood, the Cubs southpaw, shutting all kinds of guys out. 7 innings pitched, 5 hits, no runs allowed. In this lineup, Scott Hairston's batting cleanup. Ronnycedeno was now a Met. He had 2 hits. He was hitting ahead of Ike Davis, who was clearly on his way out at this point. So at this point, I'm 0-11 over 12 years at Wrigley Field. I mean, 13 years, actually. That is bad. But I came back 2 days later. 2 days later, I was back at Wrigley Field, sitting on the 3rd base side, I still remember, and finally I get a Mets victory. The Mets smoke the Cubs that game 17-1. Jeff Samardzija was the Cubs starter. 4.1 innings pitched, 6 hits allowed, 4 walks, 9 earned runs allowed. Casey Coleman relieved him for 1 2/3 innings, allowed 6 hits and 7 earned runs. This game was 1-1 in the 4th. The Mets then scored 3 runs, 6 runs, and then 6 runs over the 4th, 5th, and 6th innings. Davidwright, good game, 2 for 3 with 5 RBIs, but it was really the 5, 6, and 7 hitters that did the damage for the Mets, with Ike Davis, Scott Hairston, and Daniel Murphy. All of them homered. Murphy actually homered twice, which turned out to be a sign of things to come in later years, and all of them had 4 RBIs apiece. So I finally got a victory. So then we go to 2013. It is a May 17th game. The Mets win 3-2, and this was Mattharvey on the mound. First time I got to see Mattharvey pitch live. He was really good. 7 1/3 innings, 5 hits allowed, 2 earned runs, 6 strikeouts. Davidwright, big game, 3 hits, a home run. Daniel Murphy with another home run as well. We were starting to see the beginnings of the power of Daniel Murphy, which, as I said, would come to fruition even more in a couple of years. But May 17th was a win, but May 18th was a very special day in Mets history. It was an afternoon game, and it was the first 7-line Army outing on the road. So this was a big, big deal. We took over the left field bleachers. I was front row center in a perfect spot. Wasn't a good game. The Mets would lose 8-2. Rickankiel had 2 home runs for the Mets. Ironically, the Mets starter was Jeremy Hefner, who's now their pitching coach. And I still remember Alfonsosoriano's playing left field for the Cubs, right? And we're trying to get on his case a little bit. We're in the sea of orange. Everyone's wearing an orange T-shirt. I still got the shirt to this day, and we're chanting at Soriano, Yankee reject, da, 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 Yankee reject. He finally had to tip his hat and smile. That was pretty good. I mean, never mind he got traded for Alex Rodriguez. He was still a Yankee reject, damn it. So that was 2013. Then we go to 2014. Went to 2 games that year. The first was on June 3rd, which happened to be my mom's 60th birthday. She knew better than to go with me. That was a 2-1 Mets loss. I remember Zach Wheeler looked pretty good. 6 2/3 innings, 2 hits allowed, 7 strikeouts. Now, the Mets scored first in the game, but never again. They actually had 9 hits, but left 10 runners on base. The Cubs scored 1 run in the 8th inning off Josh Edgin with a Chris Coughlin homer. And then in the 9th inning, it was Scott Rice. Anthony Rizzo singled to lead off, moved to second on a ground out, and came home on a Nate Shearholtz walk-off single. I came back 2 days later on June 5th, another loss. This time it was 7-4, the Cubs win. Jacobdegrom was on the mound for the Mets. First time I'd seen him pitch live. He allowed 4 runs in 5 innings. Traviswood's pitching again for the Cubs. 5 innings pitched also. Eric Campbell batted cleanup for the Mets. You know, we think about those infamous lineups from early 2015 with the Josh Sattons and the John Mayberries. This was one of those games with Eric Campbell batting cleanup. Now, Andrew Brown did hit 2 home runs. I got to say, he's kind of like my guilty pleasure Met. Like, I always really liked Andrew Brown. Always thought he hit lefties well, had some sneaky power. You know, I wish he'd gotten a little bit more of a chance to play. I always liked Andrew Brown. But this game, the Mets actually left 11 runners on base. And you know who got the save for the Cubs in this game? One of the most beleaguered Mets relievers in recent memory, Neil Ramirez. Yep, Neil Ramirez closed the Mets out in that game. Then on we go to 2015. But before we get to the playoffs, I'm going to tell you about the regular season game. May 12th, Mets lose that game 6-1. So this takes my all-time record to 2-15 at Wrigley Field. Watching the Mets. It is just embarrassing. The Mets had lost all 7 games to the Cubs in the regular season. But you got to factor in, that was before they called up Michael Conforto, before they traded for Yoenis Cespedes, for Kelly Johnson, for Juan Uribe, for Tyler Clippard, before they turned over about 20% of their roster. But it was Noah Syndergaard's debut. And this was the second time I watched him pitch. The first time was at the AAA All-Star game in Kane County, Illinois. I got to watch him pitch there when he was still with the Blue Jays. Little did I know, a few months later, he'd become a Met. But Syndergaard was okay, 5 1/3 innings, 3 runs allowed, 6 hits. But they were facing peak Jake Arrieta, who'd go on to win the Cy Young. Arrieta struck out 10 in 8 innings, 3 hits allowed, 1 run. It was barely even a contest. So, like I said at this point, the Mets are 2-15 in games that I have seen live. So now, guess what happens? We all know what happens. If you're a Mets fan or a Cubs fan, you know. It's Mets-Cubs in the NLCS. And at this point, it's a very weird time in my life because I'd been out of work for a while as far as full-time jobs go. I just got a new job. I finished up my master's degree by now. And I'm going to start working downtown Chicago. I think I got hired in between games 1 and 2 is when I got the actual offer. So when the Mets went up 3-0 in the series with a chance to clinch it in Wrigley Field, I knew I had to go. So I was able to get a ticket upstairs for about $100. It was upstairs, but it was behind home plate. I like to sit behind home plate when I can. So I did a 45-minute drive from St. Charles, which is in the far west suburbs, over to the Rosemont Blue Line station on the CTA, one stop past O'Hare Airport. So then I took the Blue Line to Clark and Lake, connected to the Brown Line downtown, and then worked my way north towards where Wrigley Field is. I remember getting off at the Wellington stop. My pregame meal was at a place called Crisp, which serves Korean food, mainly Korean chicken wings and Buddha bowls with the Korean noodles and the vegetables. Going to put some pictures up here. You know, you got the soy garlic, really crispy, double fried chicken wings, which I coat in the rice flour. Extra crispy, give me a little hot sauce to dip it in. And of course, I got my vegetables to go along with it. Fantastic meal. Got the bad Buddha bowl, as you could see. And then after I was done with that, I'm walking with a purpose. Like, I'm doing like a Vince McMahon power walk. You know, from Wellington up Clark Street all the way up to Sheffield to get to Wrigley Field. And man, I wasn't sure the Mets were going to win, but I knew I was going to saunter. I was power walking my way up that 22 minutes all the way to Wrigley Field. And I get my seat, and I gotta say, the Cubs fans were loud, even for a series where they were down 3-0. They were into it. The crowd was there, but it didn't take long to keep them quiet. The pitching match was Steven Matz against Jason Hamill, and Hamill just did not have a chance. Top of the first inning, Curtis Granderson leads off with a single. Now, after Davidwright strikes out and Danielmurphy fouls out, Curtis steals second, Yoenis Cespedes walks, and on a 3-2 fastball, Lucas Duda parks a home run in left center field, just to the left of the batter's eye. It's a 3-0 lead. 3 pitches later, Travis d'Arnaud hits a follow-up home run to make it 4-0, and it was... I hate to say the game was over, but I never doubted for a second after that they were going to win that game. The Mets batted around in the first inning. Danielmurphy, of course, hits that late home run to cap off his streak of 6 consecutive games hitting a home run. Just an amazing, amazing night. The Mets win 8-3. They're the NL champions. As a matter of fact, I think we have some footage of that. Let's check that video out.
Strike, one more! Yes! 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 Thank you! Thank you! The champions!
I might have gotten just a little bit excited. For all the losses that I saw, and I saw many of them, I guess I would take all those losses just to see my team clinch a pennant in person. It was, at this point in my life, either the best or second best sporting moment I've ever been a part of, along with the that I've attended in person, along with the New York Rangers defeating the Carolina Hurricanes in Game 7 in Raleigh about a year ago now. But then I attended one more Mets-Cubs game. And that game was July 19th, 2016, and it happened to be a rematch. Noah Syndergaard against Jake Arrieta. Noah pitched 5 2/3 innings, 7 hits allowed, 1 unearned run, 8 strikeouts. Arrieta, a little bit better, 7 innings pitched, 5 hits, 1 earned run, 8 strikeouts as well. The Mets scored in the top of the 9th inning to take the lead on a Renerivera single. Rivera had 3 hits that day. He had the game-winning single scoring Neil Walker. But what really I remember more than anything is the bottom of the 9th inning. So let me set the stage for you. In comes Jeurys Familia. Now, Familia was he was a good closer for the Mets. I'm not going to say great, but he was good. He gave it up in some big spots later on in his career, but Familia was a pretty good closer for a period of time. But here's what he does. He starts the inning by walking Addison Russell. Never a good start. He then walks Miguel Montero, and Albert Almora Jr., who would later become a terrible Met, pinch runs. Up comes Javier Baez. It's amazing how many future Mets are involved in it's amazing how many guys go from the Mets to the Cubs and back. It's really crazy. Javier Baez tries to bunt the runners over, but he gets a bunt single. The bases are loaded with nobody out. Now, up comes a guy whose name I cannot pronounce, Matt Szczur. S-Z-C-Z-U-R. Every Cubs fan is probably yelling at me as they're watching this. I'm sorry, the guy's got a pretty hard freaking name to pronounce. It's not Scherzer, but it's close enough. So he grounds into a fielder's choice. Russell is out at home, so now it's 1 out. Bases are loaded. Mets still up 2-1. And who's coming up to bat? Krisbryant. Outside of Rizzo, the absolute last player that you want to see come up in this stage of the game. Familia gets him to a 1-1 count, then fires a 97-mile-an-hour inside fastball to Bryant, who turns on the ball, knocks it to third base to Josereyes, who's playing third at this stage in his career, fields it. Over to Neil Walker at second for 1, fires back over to James Loney at first base, and it's a double play, and the Mets win the game 2-1. An absolutely crazy victory. You could not have walked the tightrope any harder than Jeurys Familia did, but he got out of it. The Mets won the game. Not that the season would turn out all that well for the Mets. It turned out pretty well for the Northsiders. But that was it. So that was my 19th game I've attended in Wrigley Field. My last 2 games were Mets victories, but still, it's a 4-15 all-time record in Wrigley Field. So you can understand why I think about Mets Cubs and, the palms sweat just a little bit, the mouth gets a little bit dry. It adds a level of excitement. Now, the fact that I don't live in Chicago anymore, time has moved on, things have moved on. The games do mean just a little bit more, but it's certainly not as personal as it used to be now that I'm 1,500 miles east. But man, oh man, I've seen some crazy games, no doubt about it. And even though I don't love being inside Wrigley Field, the area around it is fantastic. And if you're a baseball fan and you haven't been there, you should go at least one time. No doubt about it. Well, I want to come on and tell my story of Mets Cubs. It's going to be a very interesting series in Wrigley Field over the next couple of days. Let's see what happens. I want to thank everybody for watching. Again, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you. I'll see you right back here with more content from you know where. The Wicker Chair.